Golden light dripped across the marble floors of the rooftop restaurant as the evening skyline of Berlin shimmered in the glass walls. The scent of truffle oil and aged wine floated through the air, while polished laughter rippled from tables lined with people who had never worried about rent or hunger. Sophie moved quietly between them, her steps careful, her tray balanced with trembling precision. It was her first shift at the upscale restaurant, and her last chance to keep her brother's surgery from being postponed. Every movement felt like a prayer whispered in motion. She adjusted her uniform and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her reflection in the polished glass caught her eye, a reminder of sleepless nights and double shifts. She inhaled softly, steadying herself before approaching the VIP table at the edge of the terrace. That was where Klaus Reinhardt sat, the man everyone whispered about, a billionaire, a self-made empire wrapped in arrogance. His gray, tailored suit looked effortless, but his gaze was sharp, like he measured the worth of everything and everyone around him. When Sophie set the wine bottle on the table, his hand waved impatiently. He said something in German, his tone dripping with mock amusement. Of course the help can't even open a bottle without shaking. The men around him chuckled low and mean. Sophie froze, but forced her lips to curve into a polite smile, pretending she didn't understand. She poured carefully, but a single drop of red landed on the white tablecloth. A single drop that exploded into silence. Klaus leaned back, his smirk slow, deliberate, cruel. They hire anyone these days. Perhaps she was washing dishes before this. His voice was calm, but each word was a slap. Sophie felt the heat crawl up her neck. The laughter of his companions filled the air again, a sound too polished to be human. She wanted to disappear, but she couldn't. She needed this job more than her pride. The restaurant manager caught her eye from across the room, his expression tight. A silent warning. Don't react. Don't ruin this. Sophie swallowed the lump in her throat. Her hands trembled, but she straightened her back. Her mother used to say, never let them see you bleed. She cleared the table with slow precision, ignoring the sting behind her eyes. Klaus turned to his guest, speaking again in German, his words fast and confident, assuming no one else could understand. He mocked her shoes, her accent, her posture, each sentence sharper than the last. She probably thinks Berlin is a country. Laughter again. Sophie blinked once, her breath shallow. They thought she was invisible, but she wasn't. She understood every word, every sneer. Inside her, something began to shift. The humiliation was heavy, but beneath it, something colder started to form. Resolve. She'd studied German linguistics at university before life had pulled her out of it, before hospital bills and fear replaced essays and coffee nights. Klaus had no idea the woman he was mocking could translate his every insult perfectly. When she stepped into the kitchen to breathe, the walls seemed to hum with the sound of her pulse. She opened her phone. A new message from the hospital. We need the payment by Friday, or the surgery is postponed. She stared at the screen until her vision blurred. Her brother's face flashed in her mind, fragile and smiling from a hospital bed. She wiped a tear quickly and locked the phone again. There was no choice. She had to endure this. Back on the floor, Klaus raised his glass as if nothing had happened. Bring another bottle, he said without looking at her. She obeyed silently, but her eyes burned with an emotion she couldn't hide anymore. He ordered her to pronounce the label of the wine aloud. The name was French complicated. She read it smoothly in perfect pronunciation. His eyebrows lifted for a fraction of a second, then his smile returned sharper. A parrot that repeats words. How impressive. The table roared with laughter again. Sophie felt her stomach twist, but she didn't flinch. She poured his glass until it was full and turned to leave. Klaus leaned toward one of the investors, whispering something cruel in German. She should be grateful I let her stand near me. That was the moment she decided. She moved to the service counter, pretending to check the order slips, but her eyes flickered to reflection in the glass wall. Klaus laughed loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. People looked. Some smiled nervously, others pretended not to hear. No one spoke up. Power had that effect on people. It bent their spines before their conscience. Sophie's chest tightened, but she exhaled slowly, letting the humiliation dissolve into something more deliberate. She looked at Klaus again, studying his face the way he carried himself, the arrogance of a man who believed the world was a language only he could speak. He didn't know she spoke it too fluently. When the night ended and the last guest left, Sophie stayed behind to polish the tables. The city lights glittered below like stars falling into glass. The sound of the elevator doors closing marked the end of the shift, but her thoughts didn't quiet. She remembered every insult word tone for tone. She thought about her brother and about the man who thought she was beneath him. In the reflection, she saw herself again, this time her posture straighter, her eyes steady. The humiliation was still there, but it had transformed, like a flame finding oxygen. She whispered under her breath, so quietly no one could hear, "You think you're untouchable." Her lips curved slightly. "Let's see how fluent you really are." Outside, the wind caught her hair as she stepped onto the empty street. The city glowed cold and bright. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't look at it yet. She didn't need to. She already knew what came next. The humiliation was over. The game had just begun. The city was quieter at night, the streets washed in silver light, and the faint hum of traffic. Sophie sat at her kitchen table, a single lamp burning. Above her, the shadows deep around her face. Lucas slept in the next room, his breathing slow, the sound of the monitor steady, like a fragile heartbeat, counting down time. Her phone screen glowed with numbers. She didn't want to see hospital bills. Overdue, notices the deadline circled in red. She closed her eyes and Klaus's voice echoed through her memory, smooth and cruel. "The help can't even pour properly." The words repeated like a curse until something inside her snapped into focus. She opened her laptop and typed his name, Klaus Reinhardt. The search results filled the screen, polished articles, smiling portraits, wealth dripping from every photo. She scrolled through pages of success stories until she reached the company's site, Reinhardt Global Holdings. She still remembered her old intern login from university, the months she had spent translating documents for a partner firm. She tried it once, expecting an error. It opened. A rush of adrenaline swept through her veins. Inside the system, the files were endless contracts, reports, correspondence in different languages, coded but familiar. She clicked through cautiously. Her fingers paused on a folder marked Geneva. Documents unfolded showing transactions, offshore accounts, names, and numbers that didn't match public records. She read carefully, her translator's instinct piecing together the pattern. Money moved in loops through shell companies, workers listed with impossible wages, contracts signed by non-existent subsidiaries. It wasn't just arrogance. It was corruption hidden behind polite signatures. Her heart raced. She leaned back, staring at the screen. She could expose him, but she knew what that meant. Powerful men did not fall quietly. She thought of Lucas again, of the tubes, the machines, the quiet promise she had made to keep him safe. Fear pulled her back, but pride pushed harder. The memory of Klaus's laughter still burned like acid. She whispered to herself, "You built your empire on silence. Let's see what happens when someone speaks." The next evening, she returned to work, her face calm, her movements practiced. Klaus was there again, holding court at his usual table, surrounded by men who smiled too easily. He ordered wine again, the same brand as before, as if daring her to spill it. She moved with steady hands, serving him without a tremor. He spoke in German again, careless, confident. Maybe she learned a new word this week. The table chuckled. Sophie looked at him for a heartbeat longer than politeness allowed. Then she smiled and turned away. In the service corner, Emilia whispered softly, "You okay?" Sophie nodded. Emilia's eyes searched hers and saw something different. Not fear, focus. When the table called for dessert, Sophie positioned her phone near the corner, discreetly, the camera facing them, recording everything. Klaus bragged between bites about his latest acquisition, mocking his competitors. Money makes them crawl. Morality is for the poor. The words dripped with contempt. Every sentence captured clearly. Later that night, Sophie sat again by her laptop headphones in the video replaying. She translated every line meticulously, English subtitles appearing one by one beneath his smug expression. Her voice was steady as she worked each phrase, a quiet strike of justice. When the final line appeared, she uploaded the video anonymously to a whistleblower forum. She hesitated for one moment before hitting send. The bar filled slowly until it said complete. By morning, the world had changed. The video was everywhere, shared on every platform under every language, captioned by strangers who saw themselves in her silence. Comments flooded in outrage, disbelief, mockery turned toward Klaus. Hashtags filled timelines, words like respect and karma glowing beneath his name. News anchors discussed its faces serious behind glossy desks. At the restaurant, the staff whispered as she walked in. Phones buzzed behind menu screens, flashing her face beside his. The manager pulled her aside, panic in his eyes. "Did you do this?" She shook her head, calm, quiet eyes steady. "I only serve tables." The lie tasted clean. Klaus arrived late. That afternoon, fury disguised as charm. He shook hands, smiled too widely, but his eyes were sharp glass behind a mask. Reporters waited outside, flashes cutting through glass windows. He demanded to see the manager, demanded to know who had betrayed him. His voice carried across the room, though he tried to control it. "Find the one who filmed me. Fire them all if you must." The manager stammered, powerless. Sophie passed behind him, unnoticed, a tray in her hands, her gaze forward. But Klaus turned, suddenly catching sight of her. The memory flickered in his eyes, recognition laced with disdain. He walked toward her, voice low, dangerous. "You think a video will ruin me? I own every story told about me." His breath smelled of expensive whiskey and fear. Sophie met his gaze, unflinching. "Then perhaps you should have chosen your words more carefully." He blinked, confusion cutting through arrogance. He hadn't heard her speak German yet. She smiled slightly. "Or did you forget I understand you perfectly?" Around them the room quieted, the waiters pausing, the guests watching. His jaw tightened. "You will regret this." She tilted her head. "Maybe, but at least I'll understand what you say while you threaten me." Cameras clicked from outside, glass flashes, catching the confrontation through the window. His anger flared red on his face. "You stupid girl." He switched back to German, forgetting the world watched. "You'll be nothing." Sophie's reply came sharp and fluent. "You already made that mistake once." A murmur spread to the dining hall. Applause broke from a corner, a quiet rebellion in sound. Klaus turned away, his face pale, realization dawning too late. His phone buzzed in his hand. The screen flashed with messages, his company's shares collapsing, his name trending for all the wrong reasons. He stood frozen, watching everything he controlled slip away in real time. Sophie walked past him, the tray still balanced perfectly, her expression unreadable. Outside, the reporters shouted his name, their microphones rising like weapons. He pushed through the doors, his voice drowned by noise. Sophie stepped into the kitchen, her breath shaking at last. Emilia caught her arm, whispering, "What did you do?" Sophie smiled faintly, the first real smile in days. "I just translated." The hum of voices faded behind her as she walked toward the back exit, the cold air of night brushing her skin. Her phone buzzed again, but she didn't look at it. She knew the world had already chosen its side. She stepped into the alley lights from the street, reflecting on wet pavement. Somewhere above in the city's maze, Klaus's empire began to crack brick by brick, reputation by reputation. Sophie took a long breath, the chill sharp and alive in her lungs. She whispered softly to herself the words only she could hear. "Now let's see how loud silence can be." The wind carried her voice into the night. The city didn't answer, but she didn't need it to. The sound of distant sirens rose somewhere in the distance, a beginning disguised as an ending. Morning light broke through the curtains, painting the room in pale gold and quiet hope. Sophie sat at the edge of her bed, the phone heavy in her hand, messages flooding in faster than she could read. Her video had crossed 10 million views. In a single night, her inbox filled with news outlets, journalists, and strangers offering support. Somewhere across the city, Klaus Reinhardt's name filled every headline, his fall unfolding publicly piece by piece. She scrolled through one article, her breath steady, eyes sharp. Investigation launched into Reinhardt Global Holdings. Another read, Billionaire's leaked video exposes culture of abuse and corruption. Each word felt like air returning to lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. The restaurant buzzed when she arrived, whispers following her like invisible wind. Some people looked at her with awe, others with fear, but all of them knew her silence had turned into a storm. The manager greeted her nervously, voice low. "You might want to stay out of sight. Reporters are waiting outside." She smiled faintly. "I've spent enough time hiding." She walked past him into the dining room, the same place where humiliation had once burned, now filled with light. Across town, Klaus sat in his penthouse, curtains drawn, his reflection fractured across the glass of a half-empty whiskey bottle. His phone rang relentlessly, each call another reminder that the world he built on pride was crumbling. He answered none of them. His assistant had quit. His investors had fled. The television behind him replayed the clip on repeat, his own voice in German, translated beneath every frame. Money buys silence. Morality is for the poor. His own words turned into a blade against him. He hurled the glass at the wall, the sound sharp, then hollow. Outside, the building cameras flashed, police cars lined the street. Authorities entered his lobby, carrying documents, warrants, words that ended empires. Klaus watched from a window, hands gripping the sill, his breath shallow. The city he once ruled no longer looked back at him. Sophie sat in a nearby cafe with Amelia, the two of them silent for a long, while the noise of the world humming softly beyond the glass. Amelia finally spoke. "You did it." Sophie shook her head. "No, he did." She looked out at the passing cars, her eyes distant. He just needed someone to translate it for everyone else. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from the hospital. Payment received. Surgery scheduled for Friday. The words blurred as tears welled quietly. She exhaled, slow relief flooding her chest. Lucas would live. The world could burn, but her brother would live. 2 days later, the city turned its eyes to the courtroom. Cameras lined the marble steps, reporters shouting questions, flashes like lightning against gray skies. Klaus arrived in a dark suit, no tie, no confidence, his face pale against the glare. Sophie stood at the back, her presence unnoticed, her heart calm. She didn't come for revenge anymore. She came for closure. Inside the courtroom, Klaus sat behind his lawyers, his hands clasped tight, the arrogance gone, replaced by something almost human. The prosecutor read the charges: tax fraud, illegal labor, manipulation, embezzlement. Words sharp as blades. Klaus stared ahead, unblinking. When asked if he had anything to say, he hesitated. The cameras zoomed closer. "I regret my words." The room murmured. Sophie almost smiled. Even now he was trying to save face, not soul. The judge spoke in German, his tone firm, clear, unflinching. "Perhaps next time you will think before you speak." The gavel fell once. Sound final. Klaus lowered his head as reporters shouted his name, the noise swelling like a tide, drowning him, the echoes of his own downfall. Later that evening, Sophie walked through the same streets she used to cross after long shifts, the air crisp against her skin. The restaurant's lights glowed softly behind her, now under new management. Its name changed, but the memory remained. She paused outside, looking through the window at the waiters moving between tables, laughter floating in the air. The same melody as before, but lighter. A young waiter dropped a tray, plate scattering across the floor. Without thinking, Sophie stepped inside, helped him gather the shards, her hands, steady, her voice gentle. "It's okay." He looked up embarrassed. "Thank you." She smiled, faintly remembering the girl who once stood shaking in that same spot, drowning in silence. She left a tip on the counter and stepped back into the night. The city seemed brighter now, or maybe she had simply stopped walking with her head down. Her phone buzzed again, this time a video notification. The news anchor's voice filled the air. Former billionaire Klaus Reinhardt sentenced to 10 years in prison following viral scandal. She stopped beneath a streetlight, listening to the word, the irony sinking deep. The translation of his arrogance now carved into history. At home, Lucas waited, his small figure in the doorway, pale, but smiling. "You look happy." She knelt beside him, hugging him gently. "You're getting your surgery, little brother." His eyes widened, joy breaking through exhaustion. "Because of you." She shook her head. "Because of truth." That night she sat by his bedside as he slept, the machines humming softly, a lullaby made of second chances. Her thoughts drifted back to Klaus, to his laughter, to the way the world had shifted when she decided to stop being silent. She realized revenge hadn't satisfied her, but justice had healed something deeper. The kind of victory that didn't shout, but resonated quietly like a note that refused to fade. As dawn crept through the window, she stood and looked out at the awakening city. Somewhere people were still laughing, still cruel, still powerful. But somewhere, too, there were others listening, waiting, watching. She whispered to herself softly, Respect is a language everyone understands. The words hung in the air, fragile then firm. Weeks passed, and Sophie received a letter from an international firm offering her a position as a translator. They admired her courage and clarity of voice. She smiled, reading it, her heart light. She accepted not for recognition, but because it felt like the right continuation of her story. She had turned pain into purpose, words into weapons, silence into strength. On her way to the hospital, she stopped at a charity office, handing over an envelope marked donation. Inside was money under the name the Reinhardt Fund for Respect. The clerk looked at her curious, but she only smiled. Later that evening, she stood outside the hospital room as Lucas slept peacefully after surgery, tubes gone, monitors quiet. She whispered again to herself the words that had carried her through humiliation and fire. The help can pour properly, and the help can translate your downfall. Outside, the city lights shimmered, like applause, faint and endless. The world kept moving, but Sophie had changed its rhythm. She walked away from the window, head high steps, certain voice calm. Justice had spoken, and for once everyone understood the language.